They arrived in silence, two golden retriever puppies, soaked, shivering, and nearly frozen, scratching weakly at the door of a woman who hadn't opened her heart, or her home, in over a decade. But what she found on that porch wasn't just desperation, it was a knock from grace itself. What happened next didn't just save their lives, it gave hers back. Stay with this story, because sometimes, the smallest paws leave the deepest prints. Willow Bend, Oregon. A town cradled between silent evergreens and the restless whisper of the Pacific, now cloaked beneath a brutal curtain of snow. Winter in Willow Bend had never been this unforgiving. The wind screamed in bursts down the narrow streets, scattering brittle pine needles and shards of ice like broken glass. The ocean, once a rhythm of comfort, now howled with a distant rage. On Sycamore Shore Drive, where the older homes still bore salt stains from storms decades past, the snow fell sideways, blanketing rooftops in layers of white silence. Meredith Quinn stood in her dimly lit kitchen, clutching a cup of untouched tea. She was tall, with a narrow frame shaped by years of stooped shoulders and cautious movements. Her long silver hair was swept into a simple knot at the nape of her neck, and the deep lines on her face curved around a mouth that hadn't known a smile in years. At 68, she lived alone in the weathered cedar house left behind by her husband, Roland, who died nearly 20 years earlier in a boat accident that still made the local papers every time another winter wave claimed someone. Since their son's estrangement 10 years ago, an argument never healed, a phone call never returned, Meredith had sealed herself away. She no longer attended church, no longer wrote letters, no longer answered knocks. The house had grown quiet with her, every floorboard and pipe humming only when necessary. That afternoon, the wind had grown cruel. Meredith had drawn the curtains tightly shut and laid fresh logs into the fireplace, but the cold still seeped through. She sat in her worn armchair, wrapped in a flannel shawl, listening to the hiss of tea cooling and the fire's reluctant crackle. That's when the noise came. A scratching, barely there, so faint she thought it might have been the branches tapping against the porch railing. She dismissed it. But then it came again. A different rhythm. Not the wind. Not wood. It was hesitant, desperate. Like fingertips too small to knock. She remained still. Her mind, so long trained to ignore intrusions, whispered excuses. It's the wind. It's ice shifting. But her chest began to tighten. The tea in her cup sloshed quietly as her fingers began to tremble. Outside, on the porch steps, two figures huddled in the blinding white. Puppies. Barely old enough to be weaned, their golden coats soaked through to the skin, darkened to a dull, heavy brown. They had no collars. No blankets. Just each other and the storm. One was slightly larger, with a deeper golden hue, his paws thick and round, suggesting he would grow into a strong, proud retriever one day. His eyes, half-lidded with exhaustion, scanned the door as if memory alone could will it open. This was Sonny, though no one had called him that yet. The smaller one, Pebble, had a narrower face and lighter fur, almost cream-colored where it wasn't streaked with mud and ice. His body was curled tightly into his brother's side, trembling uncontrollably. A faint whimper left his chapped lips before silence reclaimed him. They had walked too far for creatures so young. Their bodies bore scratches from branches, scrapes from salt-stiff sidewalks. Pebble's paw was bleeding from a jagged cut, and Sonny's ribs were faintly visible beneath his wet coat. From across the street, behind a lace curtain, another pair of eyes had been watching. Noah Clark, age 10, slight and wiry, stood on a step stool in his grandmother's kitchen, peering through fogged glass. His face was narrow, with freckles scattered over his nose like pollen in spring. He had a wild mess of brown curls and eyes that rarely missed anything. Noah wasn't supposed to be looking. His grandmother, Della, disliked nosy behavior. But Noah had always been drawn to the house across the road, the house no one ever entered, whose owner never waved back. He had seen the puppies first. Saw them come limping down the sidewalk, bodies weaving like shadows in the snow. He watched them climb the porch step by step. And now, he watched them lie still, unmoving, barely breathing. Meredith stood, unsure of what had brought her to her feet. The scratching had stopped. Still, her legs carried her to the front hall. Her woolen slippers whispered against the hardwood floor as she passed the family photos she no longer dusted. Her fingers brushed the doorknob and paused. She pressed her ear to the wood. Nothing. Just wind. And yet. She opened the door. The wind roared past her, nearly extinguishing the fireplace flame. Snow spiraled inward, dusting the floor. Her eyes adjusted. At first, she saw only a mound. Then movement, barely there. Two puppies, curled together, one's paw slung over the other like a final gesture of protection. Their fur was frozen stiff, coated with powder and ice. Pebble's body didn't move. Sonny's chest lifted in shallow gasps, his ear twitching once. Meredith's breath caught in her throat. For a moment, she didn't act. Then something inside her, some ember that had refused to die, ignited. She knelt, slowly, her joints protesting, and reached out with both arms. The weight of the pups was so slight she could have sworn they were made of paper. Paper and breath. Inside, she laid them down near the fire on the tartan blanket she had once kept for guests who no longer came. She didn't think. Her hands moved with purpose, rubbing, drying, whispering to them without realizing she'd spoken aloud. Her voice cracked as she worked, unfamiliar, as if borrowed from someone long gone. The tea she had made went cold on the table. The storm outside continued to rage, but in that house, beneath that porch light, something had changed. She didn't name them yet. She didn't cry. But when the larger puppy whimpered and shifted closer to her leg, Meredith allowed her hand to rest on his damp back. And she didn't move it. Morning in Willow Bend did not arrive with golden light, but rather with a pewter sky that pressed heavily upon the town like a lid over a boiling pot. Snow had stopped falling, yet its ghost lingered everywhere, on rooftops, on tree limbs sagging like tired arms, on power lines humming low from the weight. A thin mist coiled over the empty streets, veiling the silence in a way that made every sound, creaking wood, a distant dog's bark, a bird's feathered landing, feel sacred. Inside the old cedar house on Sycamore Shore Drive, warmth had begun to seep back into the walls. The fire, coaxed into steady life through the night, now flickered with a quiet rhythm. Meredith Quinn sat on the floor near the hearth, her long gray cardigan drawn tightly around her thin frame. Her face, pale and creased like a wintered leaf, was turned toward the two small shapes lying bundled in thick flannel. Sonny, the stronger of the two golden retriever puppies, was awake now. His amber eyes, large and liquid, watched Meredith without fear, only question. His damp fur had dried into gentle waves of gold, though patches still clung to the scent of storm. When he shifted, his limbs trembled but held. Pebble, the smaller and paler pup, had not yet stirred. Meredith reached for a towel and continued patting the smaller body gently. Her hands, veined and calloused, moved with unusual care. She hadn't touched anything living in so long. Her fingers had memorized the feel of teacups, firewood, and old letters, not fur and breath. She whispered something to Pebble, words without meaning, syllables borrowed from lullabies she'd once sung to a baby now far from home. The little body remained still. But his chest, she noted, still rose and fell, faint as dandelion seeds. The fire popped. Meredith blinked. For a moment, she was 29 again, kneeling on the rug with a box of wooden blocks, her son giggling as he built a tower that would collapse for the 6th time. Roland had sat in that same armchair behind her, grinning, exhausted from his shift at the docks but unwilling to miss a moment. She rose slowly, her knees stiff, and moved toward the kitchen. The kettle was still half full. She reheated it on the stove, then filled a bowl with warm water. After a moment's pause, she opened a long-forgotten cabinet and found the old dropper she had once used to feed a runt kitten named Violet many winters ago. The kitten hadn't survived. Meredith hadn't tried again. She returned to the hearth and dripped the water gently onto Pebble's lips. His tongue flicked weakly, then again with slightly more strength. Meredith allowed herself a breath. "That's it," she whispered, her voice gravel and velvet. "That's it, little one." From across the street, behind his bedroom curtain, Noah Clark watched through a pair of toy binoculars. He had not slept well. His grandmother, Della, had caught him staring again and lectured him about snooping on that widow like a stray cat. But Noah couldn't stop thinking about the puppies. He had seen them disappear through Meredith's door the night before, and he had prayed, his own whispered words into the folds of his blanket, that they were still alive. Noah was small for his age, with elbows and knees that bruised easily and a mind that wandered quickly. He didn't have many friends. His parents had separated the year before, leaving him in Della's care while they sorted things out. Della was kind in her own way, but strict, her world reduced to rules, routines, and reminders about not getting in people's business. But Meredith's house felt like something different, like a mystery wrapped in silence. Noah had never heard music or laughter from inside. No packages arrived. No footsteps crossed her porch. Until last night. He pulled open the drawer beneath his bed and took out the drawing he'd made, 2 dogs, one big, one small, standing in front of a house with a crooked chimney and a glowing yellow light above the door. Beneath it, he had scrawled, "Don't let them be alone." He wasn't sure if she'd seen it yet. He had slipped it beneath her porch mat the night before, when the snow was thick and his grandmother had been on the phone. It wasn't signed. He just wanted her to know someone else cared. Back in the cedar house, Meredith had moved to the den. She stood before a tall, dust-smeared bookshelf. Her hand hovered over a row of faded photo albums before settling on a slim leather-bound journal. Inside were short entries, some as brief as a line, dated over 2 decades. Her eyes skimmed a page from 15 years ago. Pebble Creek froze over early. Roland says it's a sign of a long winter. He's probably right. Adam named the ducklings. She shut the book. Later that afternoon, as daylight strained through the overcast sky, Meredith stepped onto the porch. She held a folded blanket under one arm and a small tin bowl of warm broth in the other. She paused at the threshold, unsure why she had come outside at all. The porch was quiet. Snow, now softened by the sunless sky, melted in slow drops from the railing. She bent down and set the bowl in a corner by the wooden bench. It would freeze again soon, but maybe, just maybe, it might serve another life passing by. As she turned to go back inside, she noticed the paper. Folded, damp at the corners, half hidden beneath the mat. She picked it up. The ink had bled in places, but the drawing was clear. 2 dogs. Her house. A golden light. And the words, in uneven print, "Don't let them be alone." Meredith stared at the image. Her hand trembled slightly. Inside, the fire had dimmed. She returned to the hearth. Sonny looked up as she entered, then wagged his tail just once. Pebble was still curled beside him, but now, for the first time, his nose nudged forward into the warmth. Meredith smiled, barely, and whispered, "Welcome home." The wind had softened, but the chill remained, a stubborn presence curling through the coastal streets of Willow Bend. Outside Meredith Quinn's home, icicles clung like crystal teeth beneath the porch eaves, slowly melting, one drop at a time. It was late morning, and the sky had paled into a pearly gray, as if exhausted from days of storm. A hush blanketed the town, broken only by the rare call of a gull or the creak of wood contracting in the cold. Inside the cedar house, the fire was burning steady. The warmth had transformed the once damp room into a sanctuary of quiet light. A plaid throw covered the rug near the hearth, and on it, nestled against each other like halves of a thought, lay the 2 puppies. Their fur, now brushed out and faintly fragrant from the clean towel Meredith had used, gleamed golden in the fire's reflection. They were no longer shaking. Pebble had even lifted his head briefly that morning, only to settle again, his strength still fragile but returning. Meredith sat in the armchair, a worn hardcover resting open in her lap. She wasn't reading. Her eyes had drifted from the page long ago and now rested on the puppies. Something about the way they slept, the soft huff of their breath, stirred a place in her that had been untouched for years. She hadn't spoken to another person since Thanksgiving, 2 months ago, when the postal carrier mistakenly delivered a letter meant for the Hendersons next door and she had handed it back without a word. Now, she found herself speaking aloud. "I suppose I can't keep calling you little one and big one forever," she murmured. Her voice was dry, unused, but gaining confidence. "Names matter." The larger puppy, sensing attention, raised his head and wagged his tail once. His eyes were alert now, full of curious fire. The smaller one stirred as well, shifting slightly closer to the hearth. Meredith stood, joints aching as she crossed the room. She lowered herself onto the floor beside them, slowly, carefully, her cardigan pooling around her like a winter shawl of smoke. "My son. Adam, he used to name everything. Even the ants that invaded the kitchen." She chuckled once, the sound unfamiliar to her own ears. "I think he'd approve of you too." She placed a gentle hand on the larger puppy's chest. "Sonny," she whispered. "Because you still held on to warmth, even when the world froze over." The smaller one, his head barely lifted, blinked at her. His narrow snout and delicate paws reminded her of the skittish foal her father once raised on a distant farm in Idaho. Pebble, she thought. Small but strong enough to shift rivers. "Pebble," she said, resting her palm beside his head. "You're quiet, but I hear you." She didn't cry when she said the names. But there was a catch in her throat as she reached for 2 old collar tags she had saved in a tin box since Violet and Winston, her long-lost cats, had passed. She found a length of soft ribbon in her sewing drawer, tied it carefully to each tag, and placed them gently around the pups' necks. They didn't resist. Sonny licked her hand. Pebble sighed against her arm. Across the street, Noah Clark crouched behind the mailbox, a notebook pressed to his knees. His jacket was too big, hand-me-down from a cousin in Salem, and his boots leaked snow into his socks. But he didn't care. His eyes were fixed on the front porch of the Quinn house. He had seen the old woman come out earlier with a broom, sweeping away the layer of ice with unexpected vigor. She hadn't seen the second drawing. He had slipped it under a potted plant this time. This one was more detailed, the puppies now had names, written in blocky, uneven print. Sonny and Pebble. He had made up the names, but he hoped she would like them. He didn't know that Meredith had chosen the same ones. Inside, Meredith returned to her armchair. For a moment, she simply watched the firelight play across the walls. Then she leaned forward and reached for her journal, its pages brittle but intact. She flipped past old entries, shopping lists, weather notes, a poem from 2007 that had never quite rhymed. She began to write. Sonny loves the fire. Pebble still sleeps most of the day. I think they know this house is theirs now. I don't know what that means for me yet, but I didn't shudder when Pebble licked my wrist. That's something. She paused. The pen hovered over the page. Then she added. Names are a promise. I suppose I've made mine. That evening, as dusk sank gently into the bones of the town, Meredith sat at the window with the curtains open for the first time in years. She watched the snow melt off the edge of her roof, drop by drop, like a slow forgiveness. She didn't see Noah watching from across the street, nor did she notice when he slipped away with a grin and a heart swelling with questions. But she saw the sky turn a pale lavender over Willow Bend and whispered the names again to the fire, like prayers. Sonny. Pebble. They lifted their heads at the sound and wagged their tails in unison. The days in Willow Bend had begun to stretch. Not longer in hours, winter still ruled the skies, but longer in feeling. Each sunrise seemed to linger a little more stubbornly against the faded clouds, as if the sun itself had begun to remember how to shine. The snow no longer fell in torrents but in listless drifts, soft as breath. The streets remained quiet, as they always were after a storm, like a held-in silence waiting to be broken. Inside the cedar house, the fire had become the heartbeat of the home. Meredith Quinn now kept it going with the attentiveness of a ritual. Logs stacked neatly by the hearth, ash brushed away each morning. The puppies, Sunny and Pebble, had made a kingdom out of the den. Sunny had taken to lying on his back, legs sprawled in contented chaos, while Pebble curled delicately beneath the armchair, tucked into the shadows but no longer shivering. Meredith had changed, too. Not drastically, not in ways visible to passing neighbors. But the change was there, in the way she hummed when filling the kettle, in the way her steps no longer dragged, in the way she spoke aloud when no one was around. She had even opened the kitchen curtains that morning, letting in a filmy gray light that brushed over the counters like a tentative visitor. She was preparing a bit of broth, chicken, lightly salted, for Pebble's still fragile stomach when a strange pressure settled in her chest. Not pain, not quite. More like a weight she hadn't noticed until it shifted. She paused, the ladle suspended in the air, and waited. Silence. The kind of silence that had once comforted her, now made her uneasy. She moved to the front door, not knowing why. Her steps were slow, measured, like stepping back into a room she hadn't entered since a funeral. No knock came. Still, she opened it. The porch was empty, the snow freshly dusted and unmarked. But the feeling didn't leave her. Instead, it wrapped tighter, like the edge of a memory brushing skin. She stepped outside, arms folded tight, eyes scanning the quiet street. Across the road, Della Clark, 73 and sharp-eyed beneath her brown cloche hat, was watching from behind her lace curtain. Della was not known for gossip, she was known for facts, efficiently delivered and coolly held. When her daughter had moved to Atlanta, leaving Noah in her care, she hadn't flinched. She simply made schedules, rules, and decisions. But this morning, she stood quietly as she saw Meredith step onto her porch for the second time in a week. Her gaze lowered. There, half-tucked behind the old watering can, was another folded drawing. Meredith picked it up. This one was simpler, just two golden dogs curled beside a fireplace, and a figure in a gray sweater kneeling beside them. Above, in big, uneven letters, "Everyone needs someone." Meredith didn't smile. But something behind her eyes changed, widened. She stepped back inside and closed the door gently. Then she walked directly to the fireplace, sat beside her pups, and whispered, "Is that what you were trying to tell me?" Sunny leaned into her hand. Pebble blinked slowly, still drowsy from his nap. She didn't move for a long time. Meanwhile, across the street, Noah sat on the back steps of his house, head buried in his knees. He wasn't crying, not exactly, but his throat hurt in the way it does when you've said too many words out loud to no one. He hadn't told anyone about the drawings. Not his teacher. Not his grandmother. But something about the way the woman across the street had opened her door, twice now, made him think she knew. That maybe he wasn't shouting into a void after all. That afternoon, a quiet knock came at Meredith's door. It wasn't the one from her memory, or from some ghost of a knock never given. It was real. Slow. Unsure. She opened it. There stood Noah, bundled in an oversized coat, hands behind his back. His cheeks were pink from cold, eyes wide with both courage and fear. "I'm sorry," he said quickly. "I just wanted to see if the puppies were okay. I didn't mean to be weird or anything." Meredith blinked. It had been so long since a child stood on her porch. So long since a stranger had looked her in the eye. "They're fine," she said softly. "Would you like to meet them?" Noah nodded. She stepped aside, and the boy entered slowly, reverently, as if entering a storybook. Sunny trotted up first, tail wagging, licking at the boy's gloves. Pebble hung back for a moment before taking a step forward, his head tilted with curiosity. They have names? Noah asked, crouching. Yes, Meredith replied. Sunny and Pebble. His face lit up. Those are the names I picked. Meredith looked at him, surprised. I didn't sign the drawings, he said, embarrassed. But I hoped. She reached out and touched his shoulder gently. Thank you. They sat by the fire for a while, the three of them, with two golden shapes curled at their feet. A week passed, and with it, the brittle frost that had gripped Willow Bend began to ease. The sun peeked through clouded skies with more confidence now, glancing off rooftops like it remembered what it was meant to do. The ocean, once roaring in distant tantrums, had calmed to a dull murmur. There was still snow in the corners of yards, and icicles hung stubbornly in the shade, but something had shifted. Even the crows, once silent on frozen trees, now called out across the neighborhood, as if in cautious celebration. Inside Meredith Quinn's home, the warmth was no longer confined to the fire. It lingered in the way she moved through her house, in the sound of cabinets opening, in the soft, rhythmic thud of tails against rugs. Sunny and Pebble had fully claimed the den now. Sunny grew bolder with each passing day, bounding awkwardly through the living room, sliding on the hardwood with oversized paws. Pebble followed in quieter bursts, cautious, watchful, but never far behind. He had stopped flinching at the kettle's whistle. That morning, Meredith stood at the kitchen counter, her long gray cardigan dusted with flour. The scent of cinnamon and oats wafted from the oven. Her silver-streaked hair had been let down for the first time in years, falling loosely across her shoulders like forgotten strands of moonlight. Her hands worked with steady purpose, kneading, shaping, pressing, guided by memory more than recipe. Beside her, two soft collars lay on a folded towel. They were plain brown leather with polished brass tags, nothing fancy, but real. Meredith had ordered them 3 days ago, choosing them not for style but for permanence. She traced a finger over the engraving on each. Charlie Quinn. Pebble Quinn. Yes, she had changed Sunny's name. Or rather, had allowed it to grow into something new. Sunny was a moment, she'd said to herself when the package arrived. But Charlie feels like he'll stay. Names were more than syllables. They were anchors. And these names, stitched and etched and spoken aloud, were promises. A knock came, not on the door, but on the window. Noah Clark stood outside in his puffy red coat, holding a brown paper bag. Meredith opened the door, and the winter air swept in gently, without hostility. Gran made gingerbread, he said, holding out the bag. But I think she made too much on purpose. Meredith accepted it with a quiet nod. Tell Della thank you. Noah peered past her, eyes lighting up as Charlie galloped into view, nearly knocking over a chair. Pebble followed, ears perked, tail wagging cautiously. They're fast now, he said. They are, Meredith agreed. I can barely keep up. He stepped inside without needing permission. It had become a quiet routine, these visits. Never long, never loud. Just warmth passed between two people who hadn't expected to find it again. Later, as Charlie and Pebble played beneath the coffee table, Meredith sat in her armchair with the collars in her lap. They're ready, she said, more to herself than anyone. Noah watched her with quiet reverence. You're giving them your last name. Meredith glanced at him, surprised. I saw it on the tag, he explained. Charlie Quinn. She nodded. Names are a way of saying we're not leaving. That we belong. Noah was quiet for a moment. Then, carefully, does that mean they're staying forever? Meredith smiled, full this time, unguarded. Yes. I think it does. She stood and knelt by the puppies, fastening the collars around their necks. Charlie licked her chin in response. Pebble leaned into her lap. Across the street, Della Clark watched through her lace curtains. She saw her grandson standing beside a woman once believed to be lost in grief, and two golden blurs chasing each other like streaks of sunlight. Later that night, Meredith opened her journal again. Charlie loves the rug by the window. Pebble has found the couch cushions. Noah visits every other day now. I think the house has started breathing again. She paused, then wrote. Giving them my name felt final. But in a good way. Like stitching the last piece into a quilt. I thought love meant letting go. Maybe it just means staying. She closed the book, the fire still warm beside her, the dogs curled like question marks answered by peace. The last frost of February clung to the grass like a secret. Willow Bend was on the edge of something new, not quite spring, not yet warmth, but the kind of in-between where you can almost believe in growth again. The wind had lost its bite. The sky, though still mostly gray, now broke apart in places to let blue peek through like promises. In the cedar house on Sycamore Shore Drive, the morning was slow and golden. Sunlight filtered through the living room window, pooling on the rug where Charlie and Pebble lay curled together like matching punctuation marks to a sentence Meredith Quinn hadn't dared write in years. The fire was lit, but more for habit than need. The house had its own warmth now. Meredith stood by the window in her robe and slippers, a cup of strong tea in her hand. Her hair, loosely pulled back, shimmered silver in the light. Her face, still carved with years of quiet and sorrow, had softened at the edges. There was something different in the way she watched the street outside. Not suspicion. Not distance. But readiness. Down the road, she saw Della and Noah Clark walking together, a paper bag slung over the boy's shoulder. Della wore her usual brown coat, her hat pinned at an exact angle. Noah bounced beside her, stopping every few steps to greet a squirrel or wave at a passing car. Meredith smiled to herself. It had been 3 weeks since that knock at the door. Since then, the house had been filled with more than firewood and silence. It had been filled with voices, soft ones, unsure at first, then clearer. Charlie's bark was now bold, proud. Pebble, once cautious, had taken to sleeping with his head on Noah's foot. She turned from the window and walked to the table, where a folded slip of paper sat beside her teacup. It was a flyer from the Willow Bend Community Center. At the bottom, in neat handwriting, someone had written, "Book drive volunteers needed, all ages welcome." Noah had slipped it into her mailbox the day before with a note, "You read more than anyone I know." She hadn't decided yet. But she hadn't thrown it away either. Charlie stirred at her feet, stretching long, his back legs kicking toward the fireplace. Pebble gave a quiet yawn and rolled onto his back, paws twitching. Meredith bent down, brushing their collars with her fingertips. "I used to think quiet meant peace," she said softly. "Now I think it just meant waiting." Later that morning, as the sky broke open into sun and the wind softened into breeze, Meredith stepped outside. Not just to sweep the porch, not just to refill the birdbath, but to walk. She closed the door behind her with a satisfying click. The two puppies followed without hesitation, their new collars gleaming. She didn't need a leash today, they wouldn't wander far. At the end of the street, George Connolly, her neighbor in the patched navy coat, stood shoveling what was left of the last snowdrift from his sidewalk. His dog, once a familiar sight in town, had passed years ago, but he still kept an old biscuit tin near the porch. Just in case. He looked up as Meredith approached. "Out for a walk?" She nodded. "First in a long time." He glanced down at the dogs. "You've got good company." She smiled. "The best kind." They walked together to the edge of Willow Bend Park. The snow was thinner here, the grass showing through in patches of pale green. Meredith let the dogs run ahead, their bodies bounding over the soft earth like they had never known cold. Pebble was faster now, still delicate in frame, but no longer hesitant. Charlie circled him like a guardian, tail high, ears perked. George offered her a small folded slip of paper. "They're still looking for readers at the community center," he said. "Kids' Story Hour." Thought you might have a tale or two. She took it without speaking. Later that evening, back at home, Meredith sat in the armchair with a notebook open on her lap. It wasn't her journal this time, it was a blank one, the kind meant for stories. She wrote the first line carefully. Once, 2 golden dogs found a house with no laughter. And they knocked anyway. From across the rug, Charlie gave a small bark. Pebble nuzzled into the curve of her slipper. Meredith looked around the room, bathed in firelight, and whispered to no one in particular, "I think I'm ready." The porch light stayed on that night, glowing amber against the quiet street. Not because anyone was expected, but because the door was no longer closed to what might come. In a world that often teaches us to close our doors, against pain, against loss, against change, this story reminds us of the quiet miracles that arrive not with noise, but with need. Meredith thought she was done with love, but love, in the shape of 2 silent, golden souls, came knocking anyway. And when she opened that door, it wasn't just the puppies who found warmth, it was her own heart that thawed. Let us not be afraid to open our hearts again, even after long winters of silence. Because our miracle might already be waiting just outside the door. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to believe again. Leave a comment, subscribe to stay close to stories of redemption, and may God bless everyone who chooses compassion over comfort. Type Amen in the comments if you believe love finds a way, even in the coldest seasons.